Can everybody see my screen? Yeah, great. Okay, so first of all, just want to say thank you to Matt and Niall for inviting me and obviously putting me in the prime position, which is just about when everybody is feeling tired and ready to have a little snooze. So thank you very much for doing that. So I'm going to talk about how I scaled Urban Shared rather than how to scale. This should really be more about what we've done at Urban Shared to grow. And just going to quickly go over some basics around who I am. And actually, I just threw this slide in about half an hour ago because I suddenly realised I've no idea how long this presentation might take. So it's probably erring on the short side. So therefore, I've put a few filler slides in. So let's crack on with that. So in 2016, I set up Urban Shared, and my goal at the time was I didn't want to set up just a normal property business. I wanted to create something where the customer was actually at the center of the experience. And at the time, no one was really talking about co-living. It was really just more about, vanilla HMOs and shared homes, etc. But I didn't want to do that. I wanted to create something a little bit different, but I didn't really know kind of what it was. We got our first property in 2017 in March, and that was a 4-bed property in Clapham. So we used at the time the rent-to-rent strategy, which we now call master leasing. It sounds much nicer. But we acquired our first property in March of 2017, and really didn't really know what we were doing, to be frank. But we managed to fill it, and subsequent to that, we managed to get a few more properties. And around about that time, I was also thinking about how I could create something from a technology point of view that could actually deliver on the customer experience. And again, back then, I guess I'd heard of the Collective, and I knew that they had, a huge building in West London. And creating community in something like that, for me, felt more obvious because everyone was in the same space. So there was less of a logistical, geographical challenge. And I thought, well, maybe the platform could bring people together. And so that was really the basis of the sort of design of the platform that we have. And it's essentially morphed, to be fair, into something that was a hybrid between giving our customers the opportunity to feel part of a community, and on the flip side, consolidating all the things that we were using, so WhatsApp, Excel spreadsheets, we never use fixed flow, but maintenance management tools, all onto one platform. So that's really where our kind of sort of focus on the technology took us, and we rolled this out across the Urban Shared portfolio, which pre-COVID numbers here, we're operating close to 100 members across 20 properties. So quite logistically challenging from lots of different perspectives, but we're really more talking about the kind of customer experience side of things. Back then, our average stay was about 10.5 months, which I think is greater than the average stay in vanilla HMOs. Again, nothing to back that up in this slide, but it feels like that's a relatively long length of time to spend in one property, certainly in London. And our occupancy rate was greater than 98%. You'll notice I am using the past tense because obviously COVID, for all those living in and operating in London, we do know that it's had a significant impact on some of our metrics, which we can certainly jump into at a later point. So why co-living then? Again, we've had some great speakers today, and I've been really impressed with, I felt like I've spent time today with people that really share the vision and the passion that I have. Some slides that we've seen today felt like I could have written them, which was really good, actually. I mean, I really think that the co-living movement is really it seems so obvious when we start talking about kind of giving people kind of intentional community and making people feel part of something rather than just a roof over their head. I lived in a shared house in the late 90s, and nothing has really changed since then, in my experience, apart from intentional design. So now we are seeing some incredibly beautiful shared houses that have been intentionally created. So we've got, for example, more en suites. Really look at Matt's presentation this morning, where he showed the evolution of the design, the interior design of their rooms. And that's really, for me, where the progression of the shared home is really at. You know, we are very much at the forefront of the idea of co-living. But as some of the other speakers have talked about, you know, living with other people is natural, and it's good for your mental health. You know, if we look at where we start in life, we live in groups with our family. We may go to university and live in shared halls of residence, and then when we leave university, we live in a studio flat until such time as perhaps we get married and we move back into a home living with other people. And that's definitely the sort of life cycle of a lot of people that have this as an opportunity to live with other people. And I think that is a great thing. I really do think it's a great thing that people are really focused on shared homes and what we can do to improve them. And why co-living? I think this is a really important one too. Why co-living? The HMO market, we hear time and time again, I've been hearing it since I started in 2016, that it's oversaturated. There are too many. And I think Tom shared a slide, a bell curve that talked about that kind of, normal distribution across the bell curve, with 90% of people saying it's oversaturated. And if we operate co-livings, we're operating to the right side of that bell curve, where we have an opportunity to stand out and to actually deliver a product that is not oversaturated by any stretch of the imagination. Oversaturation is an incorrect term for people who aren't innovating, in my opinion. The graph on the side really just shows that since 2004 and forecasted into 2025, the number of people living in shared homes, the number of people living in rental accommodation has doubled. So I think it's fair to assume that the number of people living in shared homes has also increased, at least by that amount. So we're definitely in a space where there is a significant demand for our product. Okay, I'm going to have to move the slide because I can't see some of the numbers. So this, I thought I'd just put a sort of a hypothetical what if around the co-living business model when compared to the HMO business model. And what if we could just tweak a few of the numbers by not much? So what if we could increase the average room rate? And what if we could reduce occupancy? And perhaps because of our focus on community, maybe we could increase the length of time people stay in our properties. And so just by changing a couple of metrics, so increasing the average room rate by 50 quid and increasing occupancy by 2%, we can see essentially an uplift in this example of nearly 10%, which is quite significant. I think as co-living operators, we're probably all operating around about the 20 to 25% net margin. So we know that that's a significant opportunity. And if you look at the stat at the bottom there, this was a stat that Matt shared with me from a piece that I think he'd done with Connor. According to Spare Room, the difference between average rents and maximum rents across the UK is 23.13%. That's staggering for me. This example, going from 700 to 750, is a 7.1% uplift. But Spare Room are noticing that the average price of a room in every region is 23% less than the top price. And I think you have to assume that the people that are gunning for those top prices are doing something different. And I think we can assume that they are looking to focus on things like co-living. So here we go. And this is, now I've put in my little Christmas theme. So scaling the business. We want to go from this, which is Santa with one reindeer. We want to go to this, which is actually one of my favourite movies of all time. I hope it's not the answer to any questions, any quiz questions that Kate's running, but we want to essentially go to this, which is a shot from Arthur Christmas. So he's got a spaceship essentially that delivers presents and loads of staff. So when we talk about scaling, if we were just to Google how to scale a business, you'd probably find that most people talk about those three areas. So systems, team, and cash. I want to put that one in because I think that's really important. I think if you want to grow your business, you want to grow your co-living business, I think having some intentional thought around the customer experience. I think it's important because I know from firsthand that if you don't and you grow, you can find yourself dropping the ball on in some areas around the customer experience. Just put very, very simply, for example, managing the expectation around maintenance. When we go from 1 to 10 co-living spaces, we know that that there's a challenge around delivering that. I'm quickly going to go through the top 3 because I think it's important to just provide a sort of slightly more complete picture. When people talk about systems, I think mostly they think about software or technology systems and solutions. But systems needn't be that. Systems are something that enable us to deliver consistent results. So it could just be, somebody mentioned earlier, the property playbook. So how do we do things? And we have a system around installing key safes that isn't driven by software, but it's a checklist that we make sure we cover off when we take on a new property, so that we make sure there's a key safe on the outside of the room, on the outside of the property, to ensure that we've got access to that property when we need it. But in a property business, those are the sorts of systems that typically exist. So tenant finds, CRM, viewings, onboarding, etc., etc. So important to give those things some thought when looking to scale. And team. So this is one that I've got less experience with, purely and simply because we're still a small business. But when growing a business and thinking about finding new people to help and to hire new people, I know from first-hand experience it's very, very challenging. If you get it wrong early on, it can have catastrophic effects. And it will affect your margin and profitability, even if you get it right, because there is a learning curve that people would need to go through. But the types of people that we're talking about when scaling our business would be people like property managers, lettings agent, contractors, so maintenance teams, plumbers, electricians, gardeners, handymen, a real challenge. And I can't remember I can't see what the last one was. And finance, of course, yeah. So we'll talk about cash in a little bit now. So obviously, this is quite an important subject when looking to scale. The cash flow, your cash requirement is very much dependent on your strategy, whether you're buying, leasing, or just managing shared homes. We have a combination of all 3, but we're more focused on leasing and managing than we are on buying. So our cash requirement may be very different to somebody whose focus is simply to build their own solutions, and their capital investment requirements would be much different. But you need to know what you're looking to do in order to be able to figure out how much money you might need. And how much money and how you raise that money, again, is quite an interesting area. Most people in the property world are very familiar with the idea of raising finance through debt. So essentially a standard loan from the bank or from a specialist lender is a very common way of growing a property business. But growing a co-living business that may not actually be a property company, it's a service business essentially, you could be looking at raising funds via equity. So that would mean giving away a piece of the business. And there's pros and cons of both options. But I think the important point above all of this is understanding. I remember when I was setting up my business to start with, and a friend of mine who's an accountant just told me, Dan, cash is king. And actually that's such an important statement. If you only take one thing away from this slide, it's in understanding that cash is king. Cash flow is the thing that kills most businesses. And having enough cash to ensure there are opportunities to grow and also protect your business against, I don't know, maybe a global pandemic, for example, but having that cash flow is super important. So customer experience. Again, there's been a sizable number of people today who've talked about customer experience. So what does it mean for me? Well, customer experience is essentially the perception that customers have of their interactions with you. So every touch point that you have with a customer defines their customer experience. From the first response on a spare room advert, right the way through to how you handle them when they're moving out of your property. That creates the customer experience. That creates the feeling that they have around your company. So every single touch point is an opportunity to either enrich that relationship or not, as the case may be. And a good customer experience can directly impact your revenue. Whilst there's no metrics to support any of this right now in my business, the churn of our customers is directly related to the customer experience. I think on another slide, I've found a statistic that suggests that 75% of people who leave shared accommodation or rental accommodation do it because of a poor experience around property management and maintenance. Now that could be really easy to solve. 75% of people leaving because essentially they don't think things are being fixed quickly enough. So the customer experience really does significantly impact your bottom line. And this is, I found this metric somewhere, this statement somewhere that talks about customer experience reliably accelerating the resiliency of your business. So simply put, if you care more about your customers, you'll have a better business, and better businesses survive. I mean, it's a fairly sweeping statement, but I think it's quite impactful. Customer experience in property is we're still very much in the early stages of people talking about customer experience. But in my opinion, it could well be the new competitive advantage. Businesses that focus on customer experience and really take it seriously are delivering themselves a significant advantage. Let's see what else. I'm having to move around the pictures of people to get my, there we go. So I found this slide with a pretty quick search on customer experience, but they all resonated with me, these points. And I'm going to give you a couple of examples whilst I go through this slide of each of these, both good and bad. So low customer effort. So whatever the interaction is, it should feel effortless for the customer. So, and for me, an example of a bad example of this is I'm sure everybody who runs one HMO will dread having to contact a utility company. It can take hours to get through to the right person. It's a very painful process. And how do we feel by the time we end up speaking to the person, after that kind of journey through different areas of their business to finally talk to the person we want to? Personally, for me, I want to shout and scream at them. And that is an example of where the effort to get a problem resolved is significantly more than it needs be. And an example of a good example of this, where the effort is minimal, is the buy now button on Amazon. Is possibly the best example of low customer effort massively impacting their business. You don't even need to go through a 3-click process if you want to buy on Amazon. And for me, that's a fantastic example of low customer effort. And that makes me feel really good when I'm shopping at Amazon. It also makes me spend more, which is pretty much what they're looking to achieve. Personalized attention. So in our business, it's possible, again, it was mentioned earlier on, I think, in one of the other calls, where we have the opportunity to personalize the service that we deliver to our customers. We have a comparatively small number of customers when compared to other businesses, and therefore our ability to retain information in a CRM and being able to personalize our experience is possible and easy. And a good example of this is, whilst I'm not a big fan, I'll be honest, but Starbucks writing your name on a coffee cup. In 2014, when I think it started, it was an intentional innovation to personalize the experience that Starbucks had with their customer. And again, I don't think it's not everyone's cup of tea, but it was designed to personalize the experience, which I think is quite interesting. Another one is contextual understanding of a situation. And again, a bad example of this would be phoning a utility company, where you have to give your information maybe 3 or 4 times to different people in different departments. They don't have a contextual understanding of your situation. Whereas if you do deliver a contextual understanding, it improves the customer experience. The last two pretty much speak for themselves, really, but proactive and clear conversations, really easy to do. Doesn't really require anything apart from a deliberate intent to ensure you are proactive and that you are communicating clearly with your customer. And fast resolution. And I think whilst fast resolution is clearly an important part of the customer experience, for me, what's more important than that is ensuring that you have honest and open dialogue. And I'm talking specifically here around maintenance issues in houses, which, as we know, can be quite challenging. We have to deliver sometimes bad news to our customers because things might take longer than they expect. But having good, honest, open communication makes a big difference. You know, it's a lot of people don't like delivering bad news. I mean, I'm included in that. But if we are honest and open with our customers and the resolution isn't fast, often customers are happy with that. We'd much rather have that conversation with them than just leave them in the dark and not let them know how long things might take to fix. So that's a super important one, I think. I don't know how many slides are left. Okay, yeah, so I've covered a little bit of that in my previous slide, but when I was thinking about the experience I wanted our customers to have, these 4 things here were the things that I wanted to deliver into my business. We've just spoken quite a lot about this, but I wanted communication at every step of the way to be positive and enhance the customer experience. So right from the word go, right from spare room and all our other portals for finding customers, all the way through to onboarding them. And then equally as important and often overlooked, the experience and the communication that we have with customers in the property. So our platform replaces WhatsApp and enables us to communicate in a two-way way with all of our houses and all of our customers. And I think that's really important to be able to do. We also have done tenant-led viewings for 2 or 3 years. And sometimes it can cause some issues in terms of profitability of the business, because it can take a little longer sometimes for customers to self-replace or to make sure that tenant-led viewings happen. We would sometimes do that quicker, but I do think the payoff is that you have houses with like-minded individuals. And sometimes when they feed back how a viewing went to me, I'm reminded that it's a good thing, because they're bought into living in this property. They're buying into the idea of living and managing that little ecosystem and making sure that people who join that ecosystem are like-minded. We had a situation right in the middle of the first lockdown when the property market was effectively closed, and we were finding it very, very difficult to find replacement customers for somebody that had left as a result of leaving London. And we had a couple of viewings, one of which was with a lad who the housemates didn't feel would gel with them in their property, and the feedback was that they didn't feel it was right for this lad to join the group. And we had very, very few inquiries coming in, but we decided against moving him into the property. And actually, it was quite a challenge because it led to a void. But I maintain and stand by the reasons that we did that, because we still have a happy house. And somebody did move in, and they all liked that person, and it worked out much, much better for us. We also, part of the technology, and I think Coho is doing this too, but we empower the customer to solve their own problems. I think it's really important that we don't have to answer every question ourselves. So part of that is a series of how-to videos and explainers that we put into the app that they can use to solve basic problems. So things, I say basic, but we even run to showing them how to refill a boiler and bleed a radiator, because maybe 30% of the calls at this time of year are around radiators that are half warm or systems that have stopped, and which are invariably because the pressure's dropped. So we include an awful lot of information within the app that helps people to self-manage. I think that's really important. One thing that I feel is a challenge, and I think that most people, when they think about co-living, they immediately think about these gatherings, and I'm glad that Connor really kind of focused on the smaller gathering, because I thought when I started, I thought, how am I going to kind of, create events that they can all come to and have fun at? And, naturally I'm introvert, and that kind of event isn't something that excites or interests me. In fact, it fills me with dread. And I'm not alone in that thinking. And smaller gatherings that are more intimate, that actually give people the opportunity to, I think Connor said, leave their best self at home. So what I mean by that is turning up and feeling comfortable being you. And I think community events that deliver that kind of opportunity are the ones that really resonate with me. And some of the lads on this call that I've spoken to on in various detail call it kind of the nudge theory. So rather than sort of being, out there community management facilitation and trying to get people, to join things that perhaps don't resonate with them, we're giving them opportunities to do things. We're using kind of like just polite and gentle nudges rather than forcing community onto people. It feels much more authentic if the opportunities are sort of gently presented to them rather than forced upon them. And something that I don't think has been discussed, and something that I think is super important, but how do we know that all this stuff is working? Whilst we're all, well into the idea of co-living being a great solution, how do we know it's working? We kind of, there's a fair leap of faith, I think, that we're all taking, that the additional investment we make in our properties and the additional focus on communities is delivering an ROI. Because fundamentally, whilst it's great that we're, that there's a huge passion around this, fundamentally, I think it was Tom that said it. He said, profit is the baseline. What more can you do? Profit is the most important thing around any business. And if we're not profitable, we go out of business, and any benefit that we could then deliver disappears. So we need to be very mindful of that. But how do we measure what we're doing? And how do we know that what we're doing is improving the experience and therefore ultimately the profitability of our business? And we're still in the early stages of thinking about stuff like this. I mean, Matt does a fair amount of surveys with his customers. So there is some data sets being built up. But I think it's super important to acknowledge that we need to see an ROI for anything that we do in our business. And therefore, if we start to measure the things that we're doing, we'll get a better understanding of whether we're actually delivering an improved investment for our business. I don't know if there's any more slides. Oh, there's one. Anyone would think I didn't put this slide deck together. I'm just pressing the button, seeing stuff for the first time and talking. It's not true. I did do this. And this is the last slide. So I'm going to leave you with this because I think some of these are really super, super interesting. We all know the old adage that it's 7 times more expensive to find a new customer than to retain an existing one. And we need to give that some serious thought. Often customers leave for things that we can't control, but they also leave for things that we can control. So if we're focused on those things, we can build a more profitable company because it's cheaper to keep an existing customer than it is to find a new one. I mentioned this second point earlier. 75% of tenants leave rented accommodation because of poor property management. It's a bit of a tongue twister. Again, give that a little bit of thought. I mean, you know, the bar, in my experience, the bar has been set quite low with most of the HMO operators nationwide. Poor property management is something that we could resolve immediately, whether that means fixing things quicker or improving the communication we have with our customers so that they understand that we don't have, for example, a stock of cookers in our storeroom and we can replace it within a day, but that if we go through the right process, we can potentially put a replacement one in within 2 days, could resolve a lot of this issue, and a lot of tenants could stay because we're delivering a better property management experience. I mentioned this one earlier as well. I think this is interesting, that people say the HMO market is saturated. I've heard this, like I say, for so many years, and I'm constantly surprised by this. It's almost like saying when you go onto Rightmove to find a house to buy, that there's so many on there that the market's saturated. I mean, it's nuts that we think that the HMO market is saturated because there are so many people doing it. They're all doing it in that bell curve that Tom shared. 90% of them are in that space where they're not looking at what they can do to deliver a better product or service. And that's what co-living is for me. That's intentional community using the sort of nudge theory is the next stage, almost the next level HMO. I don't know, I've heard that before. I don't know if you guys have. And I'll leave you with the last point. I believe this is the last slide. That, and this is quite impactful too, and possibly, you know, amongst the most important things on this deck is that consumers are no longer just comparing suppliers. So whether that be somebody supplying a house or somebody supplying a car or somebody supplying a sandwich, they're not just comparing suppliers on price and product, but also on service and experience. And this is where we can really deliver a better product than 90% of those that are just delivering vanilla HMOs. And I will just check to see if this is the last slide. No, it isn't. There's one more. So this is the last slide. So just summarizing, talked about scaling. Scaling needs good property management and systems, and good interior design is crucial, but in order to succeed in an increasingly crowded market, you absolutely have to consider intentional community. In troubled economic times, co-living could be the perfect solution. We talked about that earlier on, and I firmly believe it is. I think London's having a bit of a pants time at the moment with regards to the shared home market, but I'm more convinced than ever that once this pandemic plays out, that co-living is a far better solution to the demographic that look to share homes than any other solution. So I've got 3 URLs to join here. I don't know if you guys are part of the Co-Living Facebook group, but there's a link on there to that. And also Van mentioned earlier, on the 7th of January, as part of RE:*Connect, we are part of a day of co-living chats, link there. Most important link, however, of all 3 of those is my YouTube channel, where this is more of a passion project than anything else, but I talk quite a lot about co-living, and I talk about rent to rent and master leasing, because without that strategy, we would have got nowhere close to what we're at today in terms of understanding the shared home market and the co-living market. So thank you very much for listening, and I finished early. Great.
Amazing. Thank you very much, Dan. That was really, really, really helpful, really useful. I've got one question so far in the chat box, but if anybody else has any questions, then feel to jump in afterwards. So we've got one here, which was from Rena. And she has asked, first of all, she says, apologies in advance for a numbers question from an accountant. all is forgiven, Rena. What
Unless
are the
go on, sorry.
so what are the associated costs to achieving the £3,840 income uplift, or what that number net of costs is?
So that number essentially took the additional £50 per room and looked at the difference increasing occupancy by 2% would be. I could actually reshare it if, yeah, I won't reshare it. I'm not going to press any more buttons. But essentially that 3,950 uplift was the impact of increasing rents by 7% and increasing occupancy by 2%.
Amazing. Okay. Okay, happy with that, Rena?
Yep, thank you.
Perfect. Okay. Anybody, any other questions? Yes, Raquel?
Yes, I would love to know, obviously, because Dan and I have been talking the whole day on the breakout rooms. We felt like you have done it on purpose because we are all in the same area, him, myself, and another investor that we met earlier on. So Dan, obviously, I know Wandsworth quite well myself, and one of the things that is intriguing me massively is that you're using rent to rent in Wandsworth, and then using it on the co-living spaces. And I just don't see, in order to have these co-living spaces, you have to give amazing communal areas, don't you? And in Wandsworth, one of the things is that it's very high rent already. Isn't that the case for you?
It's very hard. It's very hard to what, sorry?
The rents are quite high already. So it's not like you can use extra bedrooms or anything like that. So how are you finding that extra space, especially for the communal areas?
Well, I mean, that's a good question. And there are loads of properties in Wandsworth. And there's, I think, kind of one of my answer to this is really that the types of properties that we take on, that we then run as co-living, do have huge shared spaces, and they do have gardens, and we won't take anything on and operate as a co-living if it doesn't meet those criterias. The property market at the kind of 4 or 5 bed level in London, we all know the prices in London are bonkers when compared to other parts of the UK. But the market for renting a £4,000 a month house is very small. You're talking about kind of, you know, executives at financial institutions who are being put up by their business. So we can come in and create an interesting value proposition to landlords in that space. We have a couple of houses on the border of Wandsworth and Lambeth that are staggering, gorgeous, you know, indoor outdoor living type places with huge shared spaces. So the answer is we just don't take properties on or don't run them as co-living if the shared spaces really don't match the kind of requirement. But I think more importantly than that, I think, I'm not sure if I made it clear during the talk, but co-living, delivering a good customer experience, which co-living kind of indirectly is synonymous with, doesn't necessarily mean huge spaces with lots of people kind of all sharing, you know, all sharing things. I think it was Leah this morning. I've obviously, the benefit of going last is I've been able to make some notes, but she talked about, said the benefit, I've obviously lost most of my work. She talked about the things, hold on, I'm going to find it.
She's still online, so maybe she can jump in and...
Yes, where was it? I've particularly resonated with me. Yeah, I can't find it, but she talked about things like delivering things that most of us would probably as HMO operators think is a standard, but they all add to the customer experience. So things like all-inclusive bills, cleaners, all those sorts of things. There was a big old list and I wrote the whole lot down. And those are things that I think are equally important when it comes to delivering, here we go, so weekly housekeeping, flexible leases, furnished spaces, partnerships, events, all-inclusive, friendly and responsive team. So whilst I think that good co-living does need decent shared space, I think we can possibly improve the level of service simply by using and implementing some of those things in the absence of big shared spaces.
Okay, so just one practical question again here. So do you use any, because obviously I own some of the houses that you're describing there, because we own the properties, we don't do the rent to rent, but it is obviously something that I have been looking into for a while, especially in London. But so do you use any of those communal areas? Do you remove some of those second, third living rooms and then just convert them into bedrooms as well?
So we have on a couple. A traditional sort of terraced house in Clapham might have 2 reception rooms and a kitchen downstairs. So one of those reception rooms would become a bedroom.
Okay, so you would use those. Okay, that's all I needed to understand. Thank you so much.
Perfect. Thank you very much. Anybody else? Any other questions for Dan? Or any feedback, any insights into what he was discussing? No? Okay, cool. So thank you very much, Dan. That was really interesting. Thank you. A big clap from Kate as well.
Thank you for having me.
Not a problem. Okay, so Kate,